Hello, and welcome to the Listen to This Poll live stream podcast, that thing. This is the show where you can talk to us about bullshit in the insurance world on both sides. I don't care. We can ask questions about anything. You can put the questions in the comments and we'll actually answer them. Today we're going to have a couple of special guests. I've got Daniel Rabowski standing next to me. Daniel's a pretty cool guy most of the time. He has his moments.
Don't we all?
Who knows? I also have Matt Phelps, the APEC Engineering owner. Matt Phelps has been on the show before. It was a fantastic time. And we talked about hail falling from altitude and how it moves through the sky. But today we have a very interesting topic. We're talking about mechanical damage. What the fuck is that? So without further ado, I really love that intro. I think I hit the wrong one though.
It's great.
If I didn't do the right one, the disclaimer wouldn't have come up, then everyone would have thought that I was acting as an attorney again, and I don't want that to happen.
Nah.
I don't want that to happen. I don't want to get in trouble for that.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Say hi, Daniel.
Hello, everybody. What's up, Remington?
Hey, what's going on, Daniel? Nice seeing you again, buddy.
You as well. How you been?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Enjoying Florida right now.
Yeah, I was about to say, because you're out of Texas, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What's bringing you over to Florida?
Just coming over here to discuss some NCI stuff and be an impromptu guest on the show tonight.
There you go.
Yeah, we had no idea Daniel was going to be around. He was scheduled to leave, and then we couldn't get rid of him. So
that's accurate.
So we're stuck with him.
It's always a good excuse to go down to Florida, man. Always a good excuse, no matter what.
Yeah. So I got Matt Phelps waiting in the wings. I don't want to leave him out there too long. We can start talking about mechanical damage and what the hell that means. So I'm going to pull in Matt Phelps. Hopefully he's ready. Here we go. Hi, Matt.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very good.
To see you guys.
This is Matt Phelps. This is not who you might think he is. Might have a similar voice and look very similar, but he is not. Who do you usually get identified as, Matt?
Well, I frequently get misidentified as Dr. Phil.
That's what I was thinking.
And what I've told
Doesn't he sound like
people is if they think that Dr. Phil looks like me, he is a handsome son of a bitch.
No,
there you go.
It's not here. Is it you?
It's proximity.
Hey, Matt, nice seeing you, buddy. You doing
Thank
okay?
you. Good to see you too, Remington. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I'm with you, man. You know, it's all subjective, but Dr. Phil, he's not too bad. You know.
I guess that's true.
All right. So if you are watching this show and you have questions about this topic or anything else, you can put them in the comments and we will see them. And if it's a good enough question, I'll pull it online and we'll actually ask the question. And one of us will answer it as truthfully as possible. I don't care what the question is. It could be, what is the closest thing that your hat smells like? And I will say bananas in suntan oil. That's what it smells like. I don't know why. Cauliflower? Cauliflower.
Matt, this is a great subject, though, because I'm starting to see this. It's more prevalent over the last couple of years. I don't think I saw this 5 years ago, but it's starting to become something new and that I've seen. I don't know about you, Matt, but it's something that needs to be addressed. What is this? What is mechanical damage? I think that's a good question.
I think it is a good question.
It's a great question. The facts are is that the meanings of words and phrases change over time. For example, if I was to tell my friends, gosh, we had a wonderful day the other day. We had a gay old time. That doesn't mean the same thing today as it did back when I was.
No, it does not.
When I was young. Well, mechanical damage doesn't mean today what it did years ago either. Today, people have the assumption that mechanical damage is associated with vandalism of some type. And that is not the definition of mechanical damage.
So I've asked multiple engineers what the definition of mechanical damage is. I've gotten multiple different answers. What is your definition of mechanical damage?
Mechanical damage is basically excessive deflection of a material. That means that it is deflected beyond its range of ductility. In other words, it's been bent and it can't come back. It's also buckling, where materials have been pushed towards each other that have caused a buckle in their formation. Then there can be fractures, and those can be both ductile fractures or brittle fractures that occur in mostly metallic products, but it's not unheard of for it to occur in non-metallic products such as asphalt, for example. Then there is also movement, which is frequently called impact or creep, where the material has moved due to thermal expansion or contraction, or that it has been displaced by wind energy or geological movement of the structure. Now, all of those things are mechanical damage. Now, notice I haven't said anything that could be considered, vandalism. These are just descriptions of types of mechanical damage. There's also wear and corrosion, and also different types of corrosion. Stress corrosion, for example, is something that occurs in metal panels of roofs where they have lost their corrosion resistance and corrosion has started. That has also weakened the panel, and so now we have deflection that has resulted from a unbalanced load like a windstorm that's been applied to it that would not have damaged it had it been not previously damaged in a way that caused it to lose some of its strength and reduced its what we call ductility. So all of these things are what mechanical damage is. And notice that nowhere in these descriptions do we use anything that would be considered as an act of vandalism. And yet routinely we hear, oh, I'm not going to pay for that. That's mechanical damage. Well, that's someone has, for lack of a better phrase, bastardized the meaning of the phrase mechanical damage to imply vandalism, when in reality it does not. Mechanical damage is related to a mechanical action, not related to vandalism.
So I have gotten different definitions from different people. I even have a book here from a different engineering firm that has a different definition. And Ashley's asking, is there an official engineer dictionary on this kind of a thing?
Yes, there it is. Mechanical damage is described and identified in a variety of textbooks, mostly on mechanics of solids and mechanics of materials. But it's something that anybody that goes through a collegiate engineering curriculum will come away with a good understanding of the definition of mechanical damage.
Well, then let me read you this one, and you can tell me if you think it fits. There are two types of mechanical damage. There's intentional and unintentional. Intentional mechanical damage is not randomly distributed on roofs, not randomly distributed across shingles, often avoids roof eaves and rakes, has granules crushed by hammer blows or scrapes with coins and keys. Very specific. That's intentional. Unintentional would include foot traffic, marring, scuffing, mechanical damage in the form of bent corners, knife cuts, adhesive residue and tearing, tree impact, bullets. This is lists of mechanical damage according to a fairly prominent engineering firm that teaches courses about this stuff.
Is it 4 letters?
So I have a question in regards to that. So obviously we're separating the difference between intentional and unintentional, but does the definition according to this book dictate whether intentional or unintentional falls in line with what we're looking at when we're looking at storm damage and what is actually, according to mass definition, mechanical damage a lot of times that the carrier tries to exclude? Is there a separation between intentional and unintentional and how those two are looked at? Anybody?
I'm going to say this, for a loss to be considered vandalism, there's an element of intent that needs to be associated with the loss. The intention for them to intentionally damage something, spray paint something, whatever, break a window, whatever it might be, that's the element for vandalism. And it seems like that definition really should have 2 separate definitions, because I feel like there can't be one or the other. I feel like there needs to be one that's directly forward, or they just need to call it vandalism and stop calling it intentional mechanical damage.
Yeah, I think there's an absolute misuse of the term, right? And like Matt said, it's somewhere along the line the whole thing was bastardized, but I think it's understanding the more direct definition of what that term means as opposed to the implied interpretation of what it means, right? So
this definitely doesn't actually give a definition. It just lists the types of mechanical damage as examples. Do these examples fit your definition, Matt?
Well, we're talking about mechanical damage, and what you were reading mostly from that course book you have, there's causes of mechanical damage. For example, impact damage is certainly damage, and that is due to an impact by a projectile. Now, that certainly could be hail.
Sure.
But when you hear them, some engineers and adjusters and folks like that talk about mechanical damage, they're not saying that it's hail. They're saying that it is something that is an act of vandalism. And that's just simply not true. We have to make a separation between mechanical damage and causes of mechanical damage. Yes, people do sometimes damage their roofs and fraudulently file an insurance claim. That does happen. And yes, it frequently has the appearance of what you just read from the reference book that you have.
Sure.
However, those are causes of mechanical damage. They are not of themselves the mechanical damage. Impacts certainly are, but things that are also a loss of material, such as a piece of say one of the tabs of a 3-tab shingle being torn off by the wind. Certainly that's mechanical damage just as much as if it had been impacted by ice or a ball peen hammer. All of those things are mechanical damage. The ball peen hammer is vandalism. The other two are acts of nature. So
having intentional and unintentional mechanical damage does make sense. According to you, basically everything that we might see on a roof could be considered mechanical damage, and then we're still just talking about a different cause. So if they're identifying the damage and they say mechanical damage, they're not necessarily identifying the cause.
Just because it's mechanical damage, that doesn't mean that it is caused by vandalism, nor does it necessarily mean that it's caused by a natural event, such as a storm. So people have to be careful when they're using this language, because there's some responsibility that goes along here. If you're implying that something is an act of vandalism just by using the phrase mechanical damage, then you are intentionally misleading the audience. And so we have to correct people when they do that mechanical damage may or may not be an act of vandalism, or it may or may not be an act of a natural cause. But they have to describe that. So if they don't have adjectives that describe the mechanical damage, then they can be very misleading with those words.
So I often see the terms in an engineer report, mechanical damage caused during previous aggressive inspection services, very aggressive ones.
Right.
If they're arguing that it's aggressive inspection services, that seems to mean vandalism. They're saying it's mechanical damage caused by vandalism, basically. What I find interesting is that when an engineering firm does something like this or says something like that, they identify all the damage on the roof as being caused during the previous aggressive inspection services.
Right.
It's either 100% this or 100% that. It never seems to be too much of a mix. Not never,
Well,
I shouldn't say never. It often isn't a mix.
a lot of times folks are using specific indicators to tell them, is this mechanical damage the result of vandalism or a result of a natural impact or a natural cause? One of the leading things that people look for is if it is a granulated roof surface, have the granules been powdered inside the impact? If the granules have been crushed and powdered inside the impact, then it frequently is assumed that that is the result of intentional vandalism, of hitting it with a hammer. And that's not necessarily true. There are wind-blown debris that when they hit the roof, they can do the exact same thing. And nobody says, oh, well, we need to stop and investigate that. That may be something other than some guy up on the roof with a ball-peen hammer. Now, when they start adding things to it, that there's a definitive pattern that is not natural. In other words, the guy's sitting down on his haunches and has a semicircle around him of hammer hits. Okay, that's a pretty good indicator that that is vandalism. However, these types of random hits that also have powdered granules, they occur all the time due to wind-blown debris. It just depends on what is the debris that's being blown. If the debris is specifically metal or harder than ice, then it can definitely powder the granules and can mimic something that might otherwise be considered vandalism. But from its random appearance, someone should be able to tell the difference. We teach this in our classes, teaching the students, okay, this is what vandalism looks like. This is what a naturally occurring hit or impact by a hailstone looks like. Compare and contrast these two things so that I can see that you clearly understand the difference between the two. And maybe we've been remiss in that we have failed to adequately teach our students. You have to have the correct verbiage and the correct adjectives to describe this so that there's no misunderstanding. Otherwise, the communication can be misleading.
Great explanation, by the way. I love the information. I'm learning a lot about, because like I said, I've only started seeing this probably, give or take, about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I started seeing this mechanical damage. And the thing, what's driving me crazy, I just got to say it, what's driving me crazy is that insurance carriers are hiring engineers to go out and inspect, let's just use roofs because we've been talking about roofs, inspect a roof. The engineering report comes back. They say, we are denying this claim. Please see attached our engineering report. And within the engineering report, it's saying it's mechanical damage that they found. Yeah, they found, 150 crease shingles, but they believed it's from mechanical damage. I then follow up and I say, okay, please tell me what mechanical damage is in an email to the desk adjuster or opposing counsel. And they say back to me, please refer to the engineering report. It's like they're just chasing their tail. They won't tell me
it's in a loop.
It's frustrating. So it's good to know these different layers of what actually mechanical damage can be. I just had
a client that was a roofer, and he was accused of mechanically damaging the roof. The engineer that wrote the report opined that the damage was not from hail, it was from mechanical damage. and resulted from the roofer dragging his equipment like air compressors and pneumatic nailing guns and things like that on top of the roof, and that's what caused the damage. Well, imagine his surprise when I had a lot of photos that were taken by the roofer's crew when they were assembling it, and the roof was all hand nailed. There were no pneumatic guns up on that roof. There were no air compressors. They drove the nails the way that we used to do it when I was young. So, guys make assumptions or make assertions that are not based in fact. And that's one of the things that we have to follow up on and make sure, are their facts correct? If they're not, we need to call them out for it. When I wrote my rebuttal report to this engineers, I pointed out the fact via the photos, this was a hand-driven roof, a hand-nailed roof. There were no mechanical devices on it that could have caused the damage that the engineer had groundlessly suggested had occurred. Furthermore, it was a certain type of shingle that has a gap, an open void space between the upper and lower shingle at the end of the lower shingle that makes it particularly vulnerable to hail hits in that area. And so I built a mock roof. I calculated the areas of the void space and calculated the percentage of the roof area that is over a void space, which turned out to be about 20%. And I said, these are where all the hail hits appear because this area is different. It's not supported underneath it, and it tears the shingle with the impact. And so we could show the spatial distribution of these hail hits, and you can see lines of them running lengthwise on the roof, side to side, where these void spaces are occurring lengthwise at the bottom of the lower shingle. My client was a roofer. He was very, very happy to be exonerated. But the point is if the engineer who had investigated this roof on behalf of the insurance company had done his job correctly, this would not have been necessary, and my client would not have had to have incurred the cost of hiring me to go out and do the investigation that I did.
All right, so if you've got someone that's saying that something is mechanical damage, and obviously it could be caused by many different things, but ultimately mechanical damage itself isn't excluded in any policy that I've seen. Would mechanical damage be covered on an open peril policy?
Well, Remington could probably answer that a lot better than I can. I don't know a lot about policy language.
I was just going to say it was. I was going to be that guy.
Well, I think part of what you have going on. Oh, sorry, Remington, go ahead.
No, Daniel, go for it.
So,
I want to hear what you have to say.
So I think a part of what you have going on, right, is it's no different than the argument when carriers come out and they undervalue a claim on the first go because they know that statistically the vast majority of people aren't going to argue that claim, right? So if an engineer comes out and uses the term mechanical damage, they're playing ignorance against all of the insureds, right? Of, well, my interpretation of that term mechanical is something completely different. So if the carrier can deny it based off of the usage of that term and the lack of knowledge from the insured of what that actually means, the 10-minute explanation that we got from Matt, it was fantastic. Most people are going to know that, right? So then most people are not going to argue it. You're playing the law of large numbers again in just a different capacity. And how many people don't fight that because, well, the engineer report said mechanical damage, and so we must not be covered, right? Then they're not getting a law firm or a PA firm involved that we can argue that, even though we know majority of the time mechanical damage is a scapegoat, right? So to me, it's just another instance of the law of large numbers game that gets taught from the IA perspective over and over and over again of find those minute details and then find a way to undervalue / deny the claim, which then ultimately gives those engineers a bad name because you're used to seeing the same engineers over and over again. And a lot of our ignorance a lot of times in some of those things is, well, we saw that too, right? And we don't know the very in-depth, down and dirty details that the engineer like Matt actually knows and how to apply that correctly to navigate the claim.
Good point. Good point. Hey, Matt Phelps, I say the last name.
We've had a lot of claims to be part of some.
Did you just see that shout out that you got?
Sorry.
One of the best guests that we've ever had on the show.
Thank you, Mr. Baker, or Burker, excuse me. Yeah, I think in the private chat, I've been typing messages out for people to see if,
they don't see that.
Please feel free to, if we don't get to them in the show, feel free to email me on the email address I put on here, and I'll be glad to try and help you.
So they don't see the private comments that you're writing. We see it.
That's for us.
That's for internally.
Okay, well,
you got to go to the regular comments.
Hey, do this, Matt. Put Phelps's email address up there so everybody can see it and send him the questions if anybody has any questions in regards to mechanical damage, because I can definitely tell he's interested in this and wants to address anybody's questions that they have.
Well, it's something that I have to make an argument on almost all cases. And, one of the things that you talked about, the law of large numbers, that's a very important statistical theory that a lot of what we do is based upon that. It's a very large, complex system or collection of accepted methodologies. But it has an assumption in it, and this is an assumption that routinely seems to get violated in cases like this, and that is it assumes that everybody has perfect knowledge. And the reality is particularly homeowners, they don't. I don't mean to say anything bad about homeowners at all,
but they've never had a reason to.
It's not their profession, and they don't know the language. They don't know the things that we are discussing here.
But wait a minute. We're talking about insurance policies. Those are supposed to be written in plain language. We should know everything. It's layman's terms you're supposed to be dealing with, right? Isn't that how insurance works?
Unfortunately, it's just not that way.
Damn it. I think that they play on people's assumptions all the time. I teach this in a breakout session that they do called Bullshit Insurance Companies Feed You. They play on people's assumptions for a lot of terminology.
Right.
If they don't define something and it has a different meaning to one person over another, then people are going to make assumptions, even if half the people make the assumption that it means something, and that leads to no coverage, then that's half the people that don't get coverage. Just like mechanical.
One of the things that we haven't talked about yet with regards to mechanical damage is that it leads to other things. So specifically, mechanical damage will lead to a change in the material shape. It will lead to alignment problems. Who wants to have a roof that the shingles are misaligned and it looks funny? Who wants to have a tile roof that the interlocking channel has come unzipped and doesn't sit back down together, and now the tile roof doesn't function at all? Then there are also, of course, changes in the materials properties. For example, a solid hail hit on an asphalt shingled roof may put holes in it. It may not put a complete hole in it, but it may put a damage the scrim that is what's providing the structural strength of holding that shingle together. The fabric that is the asphalt is it's dipped in the asphalt to build it up around it. So if the scrim is damaged, there's no way the shingle can withstand the wind loads that it is intended to. So all of these things are properties that you paid for when you bought that product, but that you have lost that property as a result of some type of mechanical damage. Also, the changes can be local, they can be large scale, they can result in local loading events. For example, if you have a metal roof and you have some of the screws that have been either pulled out of the substrate or that they have been pulled through the metal panels, they are no longer carrying their fair share of the load. So now their load is being transferred to the next fastener. So we have this propagating damage that's going to occur as a result of the initial loss. But then also mechanical damage will introduce anomalies and create damages in the materials that are not necessarily even apparent. For example, one of the things that our firm always does in investigating tile roofs or slate roofs is that we remove them and look and see when the tile was wind lifted, when the front of it went up, the ass end of it went down. And when it went down, it could have gouged a hole in the underlayment underneath it. Well, the only way you're going to know that is to take the tiles off and look. So
have you come across that? Has that happened a lot?
Yes, many times.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's going to use the nail as a fulcrum. It's going to rotate on that nail. That makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly right. You can't move. You can't pick up one end of the stick without picking up the other. If you move one end up, the other end has got to go down. And so I had a case where I had done an investigation that every one of the locations that I picked had erosions in the underlayment that would cause them to leak. And I had the umpire ask me, how did you know to pick your locations? And I said, well, I did. I used the exact locations that were identified by the engineer that represented the insurance company. If you look at my locations, you'll see that they are an exact mirror of his locations. Only I found the damage because I removed tiles and looked at the underlayment, and he didn't. So his report showed that there was no damage to this roof whatsoever. My report was quite different. We wound up having to have the roof completely redone in order to replace the underlayment, because the underlayment can't be repaired. The only repair for it is to replace it. And so to replace it, you have to remove all the tiles. And these were a historical tile that was no longer available. The breakage was high enough that the insurance company graciously agreed, and they agreed to replace the roof in its entirety.
Not to be contradictory, but I have a claim involving Carlisle underlayment, high temp ice and water shield that had small tear in it, and they agreed that if it was less than 1 inch square, that it could be resealed with a specific sealant. But if it was larger than that, then they said that it wasn't something that they could repair. So, well,
what my experience has been is we cut the samples out, we take them back to our lab, we perform ASTM-D 3861, which is a water migration test through roofing materials, and we can show them unequivocally that sample leaks. And then we are able to collect enough samples that we can show them statistically that this is going to occur on each and every location. And if they want to go out there and hand seal every one of those holes, they can have at it, but they'll be old and gray by the time they get through.
So is there a recourse? So if you're doing a follow-up or fall behind another engineer that didn't test appropriately, right? Is there recourse for that engineer or that engineering firm for not performing a proper inspection, right? Is there something that exists in the world of engineers that counterbalances those things?
Well, what you say is exactly right. You know, and sometimes the engineer for the insurance company is like, we're not speaking the same language. Mm-hmm. And so we're not having any communication, let alone are we agreeing to common ground? And some damages are so blatantly obvious that to deny that is clearly a misrepresentation of the truth. Well, you know, if you look at the ethics by which an attorney must practice law, his first duty is to be a zealous advocate of his client. Not speaking bad about any attorneys.
Yes, we are.
But they can comply with their professional requirements, and they can lie through their teeth to do it. What is the first requirement of an engineer in our code of ethics?
Hey, Remington, I've been wondering this for a while.
It says the engineer shall be truthful. No wiggle room there. The engineer
And they can't work on
truthful.
something that they're not competent in. Real quick, though, Remington, I've been wondering this for a while. Are attorneys allowed to lie?
No, they're not supposed to lie, but it matters in a sense of misrepresenting something versus lying. In defense counsel's opinions are two different things, unfortunately. I tell you this, they don't lie as much as a seller's agent that for real estate. Those are the worst. Oh, we have 5 offers on the table. Yeah, right. No, you don't. But I'm being serious. They don't. I feel like defense counsels lie more than plaintiffs' counsels for sure. I always go by.
Is that because you're biased?
No. I'm being, and again, I don't deal with plaintiffs' attorneys. I deal with all defense attorneys, right? Because I'm talking to them every day, every 15 minutes. But I go by the premise of this, and I tell the other associates in my firm this, and they agree, my colleagues, is I don't say something unless I know the answer to it. I don't try and answer something. I just don't. I don't do that anymore. Or try to just say what's off the hip because it's probably going to sound good and that's what they want to hear. But no, Matt, there's definitely a lot of times where I catch attorneys bold-faced lying on certain acts. And also, I feel like they drink the Kool-Aid so much that they don't know they're lying. They just do it. It's just their natural habit to do a certain thing and lie about a certain way. It's pretty incredible.
Well, that's one of the things that I've tried to tell people. The engineering profession is one that I have a duty. I have a public obligation to be truthful. I have a public obligation to be objective. I have a public obligation to be unbiased. Well, when you are on a roof and the engineer for the other side, and sometimes I do work for insurance companies, but the engineer on the other side positively refuses to acknowledge what it is, the damage that you're pointing out, that is being untruthful.
And that's where my question lies.
Engineer's ethical obligation, according to the Principles and Practices Act of the state of Texas and practically every other state in the union.
Well, and that's where my question lies, right? So you're in a very, very technical field, right? So there is very distinct, very clear understanding of what you're a specialist in, right? And so there's got to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's got to be a standard for an inspection, right? If you're being called out to look at a shingle roof, being that you're an engineer, then to me there's a standard, right? And if one party isn't adhering to that standard, what is the recourse, if there's any recourse? Because I know if an adjuster goes out and misinterprets something intentionally, or a roofer goes out and does something different, like there's a recourse for a lot of the stuff that we do. Does that exist in your profession, and to what degree?
Yes, it does. Pick your state board of engineering, whether it's the Texas board or whatever, it doesn't make any difference. They all have the same requirements, are very much like the state bar. If someone makes a complaint to the state bar about an attorney, they have a board requirement that they have to investigate. They cannot ignore it. Well, all of the engineering boards in every state across the nation have the same thing. If they receive a complaint about an engineer, even though they may not believe it or they may think that it's frivolous, they still have a legal obligation to follow up on that and do a proper investigation of it. I was investigated years ago because of my treatment of one of my employees. Well, the Texas board contacted me and said, we've had a complaint about you because you yelled at one of your employees. And I had to respond to that. And I told the board, so long as I do not break a law, how I discipline my employees is none of your damn business. And their reply was, you're right, we agree. But nevertheless, we have to follow up.
Yeah.
And
Did you ever get rid of that paddle?
I'm sorry?
Did you ever get rid of that paddle?
But so does it become a 3 strikes you're out, or it obviously vague representation of the question, right? But like, cool, is it a slap on the wrist, or and I'm going somewhere very directional with the question of, if I'm the PA on a claim, or if Remington's the lawyer on a claim, and we run across we know for a fact that engineer didn't do the proper level of diligence to fully assess the scenario, right? In lieu of bringing in another engineer, what is the recourse? What can we do, with the exception of filing a complaint with the Board of Engineers or whoever's the governing authority there? Do they just get a slap on the wrist and they get to go back out tomorrow and do the same that they were doing before? Or is there a platform that says, hey, we've investigated Joe Smith's engineering firm 15 times in the last 6 months, probably time to shut it down?
They do look for patterns. So if there is a pattern of abuse, when I say abuse, I mean a violation of the Engineering Principles and Practices Act, then they will take disciplinary action against the engineer. Now, there are several different disciplinary options available to the board, from like you say, a slap on the wrist, to financial penalties, to suspension of their license, to even revoking their license. So there are a large number of administrative and financial penalties available to the state board for engineers that create these violations. They are also subject to criminal violations. You guys may recall a couple of engineering firms that were found to be guilty from Superstorm Sandy, that were actually changing engineers' reports from there being structural damage to there being no structural damage. You guys may have seen that on the 60 Minutes news program. Some of those guys went to jail. They went to prison. Now, they probably got, community service, but nevertheless, their careers were permanently ended. So it does happen. There's a question: are engineer complaints results public information? The answer to that is it is not advertised, but it is available through the engineering board of every state. That if you go to the engineers board's website, you can find a list of all disciplinary actions that have occurred in the last 30 days.
What I'm doing for the next few minutes.
We're Googling our life away over here.
That's good information. We got about 15 minutes left. Let me ask a question. And I am very curious. Can a engineer on, let's just say it's a architectural shingle, determine the difference between vandalism under mechanical damage? Well, actually, let's just separate those two, because I don't like how there's intentional and unintentional per Matt's definition. And I say Matt as in Matt Mulholland's handbook definition that he read. The difference between vandalism and a storm crease shingle. Can they unequivocally determine the difference between the two without there being an eyewitness or so forth?
The answer is, unfortunately, maybe. It is also to what degree of certainty. In other words, can I say that beyond a reasonable doubt that something was the result of storm damage instead of mechanical damage? Well, that's a much higher bar than saying, well, based upon the engineering science, it's more likely than not that damage was the result of the indicated cause, which was a storm of some kind. So This is where engineering and the law get real sticky, because there is a separate bar. The criminal bar is absolute, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The bar of civil is based upon a reasonable degree of certainty. So when we answer that question, I'm answering it from the standpoint of civil applications, not criminal. So I can usually determine within a reasonable degree of engineering certainty whether something is the result of natural conditions or intentional mechanical damage. And case in point is I investigated a very large church in the Dallas area a few years ago. And it was a very large standing seam metal roof, and there had been a tornado that had passed immediately adjacent to the house, or to the church, to the sanctuary, and the schools and the gymnasium and all of the church buildings that were there. Well, up on the roof, I found holes going through the standing seam metal. And this was a pretty good standing seam metal roof. It was a 20 gauge roof, so that's fairly thick roof, pretty good quality. And the engineer that opposed me said, well, man, I would feel better if there weren't these round holes that look like a bullet hole. And I said, well, I grew up as the son of a farmer and a rancher. I've been around firearms my entire life. I've been a hunter lots of times in my life, but I have never seen a single bullet projectile that was flat on one side, and these holes are all flat on one side. There's no bullet in the world that does that. Well, he accepted my argument, and he said, I would feel a lot better if there was more than just one of these. And I said, oh, really? Well, how about this one right over here? And less than 10 feet away was another hole exactly like that. And so this is where pattern recognition starts to play a role. What we found was that there had been a object that it had blown across the roof, and it had tumbled, and we had these roundish with one flat side holes through it that bounced again and again and again. And by the time we were through with it, we found a dozen of these things in a relatively short distance. But you have to have the ability to detect and recognize that pattern. And
what was it?
I'm sorry?
What was it?
What was it that caused the penetrations?
Yeah.
I think that it was probably a aerial broken off of a TV antenna. That
okay, it'd be flat in order to have the little indentation to keep some structural strength on it.
And the reason that I say that is that there was an older subdivision there that had a lot of these antennas on them, and you could tell that it was right in the path of the tornado, and that I could see some in the distance that had all been broken off. So that kind of, we're looking here at more of a mosaic of what is leading up and causing the damage. So this had a damage profile that we could identify, and it had causation that fit the damage profile. And that's what all good reports must have. They have to have an adequately documented damage profile, and then they have to have a causation model that adequately explains that damage. And in this case, we were able to do that, and the opposing engineering firm ultimately wound up agreeing with my findings, and the insurance company bought the roofs.
So you're telling me that you can look at buildings outside of the building that you're looking at?
No, he didn't say that.
Oh.
No, obviously you cannot.
So off in the distance.
Can't do that. No,
for example,
completely. No,
when you see the buildings across the street, I tell my students, when does your investigation start? Does it start when you pull up into the client's parking lot of their building? No, it starts long before then. It starts while you're driving there and you are observing damage profiles on adjacent structures. Okay, that is not directly what is saying to happen to your structure, but it's giving you information about the direction of the storm, the length of the storm, and some information about the intensity of the storm based upon what materials are torn up or displaced and which ones aren't.
So I guess if they got in an accident on the way, it could fall under workman's comp then.
Yeah, hopefully that won't be storm related.
Who knows? I feel like we've really hit some. We could take this conversation like 5 different paths. And we only have like 10 minutes left, so I'm trying to determine what the best way to go with this is. Remington, I know you had some specific ideas in mind here. I'm going to let you guide this a little bit. Is there anything further we need to get into?
Well, yeah, I want to ask you this, Mulholland, and then I want everybody to kind of pitch in and say, this is what I would do. How do you overcome a claim? And Mr. Phelps, this is when you answer it. I know you're not into policy and things like that. I completely understand that, but maybe just key questions or that might come up. But I'm asking you this, Mulholland. How do you overcome a denied claim in which the carrier is standing on the position that it's mechanical damage? And we've been on roofs, so let's talk about roofs. How do you overcome that denial?
I can tell you what I've done in the past.
Let's hear it.
I've often said, oh, it's mechanical damage. Great. I don't see an exclusion for that. I guess there's coverage. Please send me an estimate. And then they'll say, well, no, there's no coverage. Okay, then send me a denial letter. I need to see a denial letter. They need to specify where in the policy there is an exclusion. And then they'll send me a denial letter and I'll have the entire exclusion section, which is usually an indication that they don't actually know that they can deny anything. I'll say, well, where is it in this? You just give me the entire exclusion section. It doesn't make any sense. They said, well, we think it stands on its own, that it's obvious. Well, no, it's not. I need some more clarification, please. Where in this exclusions is that? And they'll say, we think it's very clear and we're standing behind our engineering. This is usually where it goes. I will often also ask the adjuster to ask the engineer for clarification on what they mean by mechanical damage, because if they can clarify what that is, because clearly, according to Mr. Phelps, it's very broad. Everything that we might see on a roof is mechanical damage of some sort, it seems. And whether or not that's caused by one thing or another is really the case. So if they're going to give me something broad like aggressive inspection services, I need to have clarification. Do they mean vandalism? And I need the adjuster to ask the engineer that, because it's the engineer that's making that statement. They're relying on the engineer's basis for that denial. So if they can get the engineer to make a statement, a supplemental report, something, anything, then we can have something to work with to see if there is something that's deniable, if there is an exclusion that ties to that. But often they won't ask the engineer the follow-up question. They'll refuse to, because they know if they do, it's going to end up being coverage. So if I can get them to answer the very reasonable question of what the hell does this mean, then I could usually find a way to coverage. If I can't, then I'm usually finding a way to getting an attorney involved.
Great answer. You just made a lot of public adjusters listening money just now. So
okay.
It's a good way to do it.
I think it's important just to add on to what you were saying too, is that, I know for us, like, we always ask for a certified copy of the policy on the front end, right? And I know there's a lot of PAs that don't do that. They'll do it after the fact, after something doesn't go their way. I think it's important to do that on the front end, because then you already have that. So whatever bullshit they send you, page 47, you already know that you have the gospel, because they can't retract on the certified version of the copy that they sent you. So you have to think ahead a little bit on some of those things to be able to prep yourself for what is the inevitable conversation. They are going to try and deny it. How do you properly load the gun?
I mean, ultimately, I know that mechanical damage itself isn't excluded. So if they're going to take mechanical, give me coverage, or change what the peril is that's led to that mechanical damage, and show me an exclusion for that. If they haven't clarified the peril, the clarification that I need, then there needs to be coverage. So I know what's in that section, but I need them to tell me in a denial letter. I want them to put in writing the reason that they're denying coverage. And if the reason is so broad that they can't even describe it properly, then that seems like obvious misinterpretation or even purposeful misinterpretation of the policy, which is good things to ask very clarifying questions on to show that they are purposefully being vague. Or if you could show that pattern, you've asked them a very simple question and they refuse to answer it multiple times, I would imagine an attorney would be able to do quite a bit with that kind of a thing. So I'm asking them very simple questions. What does aggressive inspection services mean? Does that mean vandalism? And if they say, we never said vandalism, are you saying vandalism? I'm asking you what your engineer's opinion is. Can they clarify? Are they saying vandalism? Either way, there's coverage. If it's not vandalism, if it happened accidentally during an aggressive inspection, still covered. If it happened purposefully during an aggressive inspection, still covered. Either way, there's coverage. So it really doesn't even matter, but they don't even understand that there's still coverage here because it's not excluded on an open peril policy.
Hey, Daniel, your volume's
Talk towards that.
There we go.
I'm gonna turn them up.
Is this better?
No, we got nothing.
Oh, it's you.
Nothing.
It's you.
No, now it's on.
Matt broke it.
What? We'll share.
So my point was, a lot of times we see that they'll come out with just a small excerpt of the policy, right? And that's all the ammunition that they want to give the field adjuster. They want to give them just enough to make a decision, right, wrong, or indifferent, so that we have to make those arguments later. And like Matt said, there's so many of those things, especially when we're talking about mechanical damage, that I don't give a shit what the exclusion says. Unless it specifically tells me that mechanical damage, which it's not going to, I don't care. I don't.
Now, we've seen language from engineer reports over the years, such as functional damage, suddenly start appearing in insurance policies. So if this trend continues, we may start seeing exclusions for mechanical damage. But until then, it's covered.
Love it. Well, I'll say this, since we only have, 1 minute left, 2 minutes left. Mr. Phelps, if you have any last words for us or any advice when we're faced with this mechanical damage, newly developed exclusion somehow, please let us know.
Well, I'll be happy to. You guys are really smart, and I have probably learned more about policy language
I've never seen
in
one.
the course of this broadcast than I ever have known. So thank you very much. I appreciate the education you are giving me. But I've had situations where I've had adjusters tell me, Dr. Phelps, if this is caused by a covered peril, you have to be able to prove that. You have the burden of the property owner has the burden of proof. And so one of the things that we have found to be very helpful, I'm also trained in meteorology. I'm working on my master's degree in meteorology as we speak at Mississippi State University, a very fine school. The thing that I've learned is that forensic meteorology is what you're taught first. So I'm really good at finding storm events and the attributes of storms that can cause a damage profile. Now, I can't tell you if it's going to rain next week or not. I haven't even had those kind of classes yet. But they're not part of forensic meteorology either. So the thing that I have found is being able to show that you have a causation model that matches your damage profile. For example, the hail hits that I find on the roof, are they consistent with the sizes reported by the National Weather Service? Is the direction of the hail impacts consistent with the wind that was blowing at the time of the storm event? Did the amount of kinetic energy that the hail struck with exceed what it would have been if it had only been terminal velocity of how fast the hail was falling. Well, wind-driven hail hits with a lot more force than that's just falling straight down with no wind at all. In fact, it can be so much more that you can have a smaller size hailstorm cause a damage profile that, according to the literature, it won't fit, won't work. But the reality is that it does, because it's based upon kinetic energy, not just the diameter of the hailstone.
Right. Force is mass times velocity. If you're going to push additional velocity in there, it could be a smaller, and it's still going to have a lot of force.
That's exactly right. Kinetic energy is 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared. So it's exponential with respect to how fast the hailstone is moving. So if the wind is blowing it along at a faster clip, it's going to hit with a lot more force and cause a lot more damage than it otherwise would.
Absolutely. I want to bring up what Sarah Parker has brought up. She said that there's mechanical damage exclusions, and I want to say that I'd never seen one before, but then she brought up that it's tied into a marine exclusion, and now I know exactly which policy she's talking about. So Farmer Smart Plan has some marring exclusions, and in those it has exceptions. So they don't cover marring, and they define marring, blemishes, gouges, scratches, that kind of thing. And then later on, it'll say, except when caused by, and they'll have hailstorm or hail and windstorm and other things listed as exceptions to that exclusion. So if mechanical damage is every basic type of damage, and we're talking about what the cause of loss would be, I guess in that particular policy, then everything could be considered marring by the way that they defined it. Creases, tears, all that could be considered some type of marring or mechanical damage. And then whatever the cause of loss listed as an exception to that exclusion would be almost a named peril policy. So now you've got an open peril policy. It's basically a named peril policy. Well done, Farmer Smart Plan. Did it again. Unbelievable.
I'd like to add this. If you viewers do not know who Sarah Parker is, give her a shout out on Facebook or something. She is very, very, very highly intelligent and knows her stuff. So I take her comments.
So glad you said that. And then she said this, because then you basically compliment.
Besides this one subject, I'm just joking. She's extremely intelligent. So,
one of the things that would also apply to marring is if you have a loss of corrosion resistance in the marred area. That is a physical loss that you have now lost longevity of those metal panels. We perform 3 different ASTM standard methods to prove that there is either a corrosion loss on metal panels or that there is a loss of structural strength. So the 3 that we do, one is a dye penetration test, one is a galvanic corrosion test, and the other one is a Rockwell hardness test. So sometimes you may have a galvalume panel and it will provide galvanic corrosion. That's intended to, and it will do that. And it's really the only one on the market that I know of that will do that. However, if it's been dented, it will have a loss of strength in those dents, which has nothing to do with corrosion resistance. It's a loss of physical strength, and we can document that with the Rockwell hardness test. So there are tools available to satisfy the needs of these types of claims that can allow it to be paid, and it does not have to be written off because of one provision or another of the policy.
I'd like to invite you back out to discuss functional damage and cosmetic damage at some point in the very near future, Matt. Sure. I know that we'll end up spending another 3 hours if we try to go down that road right now. So that might be a 4-week. Yeah, that's a big topic. But if you're okay with that, I'd love to have you back on the show very soon to discuss those issues.
Sure, I'd be very happy to. Just let me know.
Fantastic. Matt, I'm gonna take you off the show real quick so we can wrap everything up. Thank you so much for being on. I really wish I had my thing to take notes on during this, because every time Matt gets on, I learn a shit ton.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate the time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
God, every time I want to sit at his feet, right? They probably smell terrible, but I want to sit at his feet anyway and really just take notes. I just want to hear stories.
Fire.
Yeah, and from a fire, of course. Right. With like a fleece blanket on. Maybe some hot chocolate.
He's
He just-
fantastic. He's
That's
fantastic.
awesome.
When I met him at a conference a couple years ago, I was like, that guy knows his stuff, and he's really cool. So he usually has the hail cannon. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, when he shot my shit, I was very, very happy. I had that shit right over there too.
Hey,
Eventually I'm gonna have to do that video.
One thing that I kind of picked up on today's episode is when somebody just says mechanical damage, like we're still at that same area where no one knows what that means. Is that a debris impact from a tree limb? Is it somebody from carrying equipment? It's so vague. And there needs to be a definition to it. And there is going to be at some point, I feel like. I mean, there has to be. And I know there is, but I'm talking in a sense of policy. Okay.
Right.
But here's something else I picked up on is insurance company engineers that they use all the time. I feel like they take common sense out of their equation. And I say that by this, the hail impact on this roof is 2 inches, but the hail was only 1.5 inches. So therefore it couldn't make that impact. We all know if you throw a baseball as hard as you can at sand, that impact is going to be larger than that baseball. I feel like they purposely leave out common sense from their equation. And so that's something else I picked up on today, but it's definitely true.
Yeah, the engineer conundrum and where they get their work from, you don't
shoot where you eat, right?
Yeah, you don't shoot what you eat. So if you're going to continue to get work only from the carrier side, which the vast majority of engineers that get hired by the carriers are only getting their work from that one side, of course they're going to write a report using terminology that they're kind of taught to use in order to continue to get work. They have to feed their families. It's part of their daily activities. The best engineers I've ever met, the ones that really take their job seriously and want to remain as unbiased as possible, they want to put as much information into a report as they can. And they get their hands tied. I hear too many stories from engineers where they're told to remove information either from their own firm or from the carrier before it's accepted. They're told to edit things. They're not told specifically what to say. They're just told what not to say, maybe. Reword something, please.
But again,
right.
Either
what
way.
you just said goes back to the accountability portion.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to long-wind this by any means, but if your firm is the one telling you, I get that to a degree, right? They're looking at the liability and exposure for the firm as a whole, right? Based on what you're saying. Carrier's the one that says that, though. Like, Jesus Christ, where is the accountability and what is the recourse for that? I keep saying it over and over and over again. It's not going to matter when we leave here, but I just feel better saying it.
I would love to see some of that stuff come out in some kind of discovery from a lawsuit at some point. But I would imagine if it's settled outside of court, a lot of that ends up getting hidden away in some sealed files of some kind.
Right.
And
it's kind of the name of the game sometimes, unfortunately.
So attorneys can't lie. That's crazy. I didn't know that. I honestly thought they could.
Well,
but do they?
Like I said, I mean, of course, some attorneys lie. I mean, hey, that's for another episode.
That's a different show.
That's for another episode.
Yeah.
Are attorneys full of blah? Yeah. So
yeah, some of them are full of shit. Actually, that would be a great episode.
Yeah,
so
it would be.
Next Tuesday at 6 p.m., I've got TJ McCormick on. And this is somebody that I've been trying to track down and put on here for a while because he does some things with social media that I think would benefit a lot of our audience on how they gain business and doing it in a fun way. He's the world's greatest. Like literally, like I've had the world's greatest coffee a few different places, but there's only one world's greatest.
Hey, there's only one Mr. Phelps. He's awesome too.
True.
Yeah,
Mr. Phelps is the
engineer. Can I get that guy, Mr. Phelps, to come to Knoxville, Tennessee, and look at a roof? Because everything he said described everything that the carriers argued with me about.
I love it.
Mr. Phelps, we don't have much time here. Mr. Phelps is opening up a whole new. going to call it a lab. I don't know what it's called. They've got a new lab that they're opening up in Texas, and they've invited Listen to This Bull out. This will probably happen in November to do some live episodes from their grand opening of this new lab. I honestly, wait, I don't know. It's in Texas. That's a big state. I don't know the state of Texas.
From Dallas to Indiana.
I will be there. I will be there.
I don't remember if it's El Paso.
Show. I can't wait.
I don't think it's El Paso.
I'm just saying.
There's parts of Texas. It's in Texas. I know that. It's a big state, but I suck at geography. Yeah, it might as well be. All right, so next week is TJ McCormick at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Don't miss that, so you can ask questions live. He's a lot of fun, and he wears these really interesting outfits. You're going to love that. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.
Hey, Daniel, good seeing you, buddy.
At some point.